His throne came with a warning. Serafina Mancini had spent years playing the perfect mafia wife, beautiful, silent, untouchable. But when her husband was assassinated, she realized something dangerous. She was more powerful without him. The only man who saw it was Luca Romano, her husband's most trusted enforcer. He stepped closer, his voice dark, his smirk slow. "Tell me, Regina," he murmured, "are you here to grieve, or to take his place?" Chapter 1. The Serpent's Kiss of Fate. The air in the cathedral was thick with the cloying sweetness of lilies and the bitter tang of grief. Serafina Mancini knelt, draped in black lace that whispered against the cold marble floor, a stark contrast to the fiery defiance brewing beneath her composed exterior. Her husband, Don Antonio Mancini, lay in a polished mahogany casket, his still face a mask of the ruthless power he wielded in life. He looked smaller, somehow, less formidable. A shiver traced its way down Serafina's spine, not of fear, but of something akin to anticipation. She hadn't wept, not a single tear. The women of the Famiglia, clad in their own funereal finery, cast her sidelong glances, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. Freda. Cold. They'd always called her that, behind manicured hands and carefully painted smiles. They mistook her composure for lack of feeling, her silence for weakness. They didn't understand that Serafina's grief was a different beast altogether, a slow-burning ember, fueled by years of unspoken resentments and a burgeoning sense of liberation. Antonio had been a force of nature, a storm that consumed everything in its path. He'd taken Serafina from her quiet life, a life filled with books and the scent of her grandmother's lemon trees, and plunged her into a world of opulent darkness. He'd promised her protection, power, a love that would burn brighter than the Sicilian sun. He'd delivered on the first two, but the love that had been a carefully crafted illusion, a gilded cage built to contain her, to control her. The priest's voice droned on, his words a meaningless hum against the roar of Serafina's thoughts. She'd played the part of the dutiful wife, the silent ornament at Antonio's side. She'd learned to navigate the treacherous currents of mafia politics, to read the unspoken threats in a handshake, the veiled promises in a smile. She'd learned to survive. But survival wasn't living. A hand, strong and warm, settled on her shoulder. Serafina didn't need to look up to know who it was.
Luca Romano.
Antonio's most trusted enforcer, his shadow, his confidant. The only man who had ever truly seen her, not as Antonio's wife, but as Serafina. His scent, a heady mix of leather, expensive cologne, and something darker, something untamed, enveloped her. It was a scent she'd grown accustomed to over the years, a scent that had always stirred a strange mix of fear and something else, something she hadn't dared to name. Luca leaned down, his breath ghosting across her ear. "Regina," he murmured, the word a low, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. The title, Queen, felt both alien and strangely fitting. It was a title Antonio had never used, preferring to keep her in her place, a beautiful possession, not a partner. "Are you here to grieve, or to take his place?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a challenge, a dare, and a promise, all rolled into one. Serafina slowly raised her head, her gaze meeting his. Luca's eyes were dark, almost black, and impossibly deep. They held a knowing, a hint of amusement, and a flicker of something that made her heart beat a little faster. He saw the fire in her, the steel beneath the silk. He saw the woman she had been hiding, even from herself. For years, Luca had been a silent observer, a watchful guardian. He'd witnessed Antonio's cruelty, his possessiveness, his casual disregard for Serafina's spirit. He'd seen the way she'd slowly withdrawn, building walls around her heart, brick by brick. He'd also seen the moments when her spirit flashed through, the subtle acts of defiance, the quiet strength in her eyes. Serafina's lips curved into a slow, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps," she whispered back, her voice a husky murmur that only he could hear, "a little of both." The funeral service continued, but the world had shifted on its axis. The death of Don Antonio Mancini was not just the end of an era, it was the beginning of something new, something dangerous, something exhilarating. The whispers of the Famiglia women faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of Serafina's own heart, a drumbeat of defiance and anticipation. She was no longer just the grieving widow. She was Serafina Mancini, and she was ready to claim her throne. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The serpent had shed its skin. But the question remained if she was ready for the venom that came along with it. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Gilded Cage. The wake was held at the Mancini Villa, a sprawling estate overlooking the glittering lights of Palermo. The air, still heavy with the scent of morning flowers, now mingled with the aroma of rich food and expensive wine. Laughter, carefully modulated and laced with an undercurrent of tension, echoed through the marble halls. It was a macabre celebration, a ritualistic display of respect for the dead, and a subtle jockeying for power among the living. Serafina moved through the crowd with a newfound grace, a queen surveying her newly inherited kingdom. She accepted condolences with a polite nod, a gentle touch of her hand, her black dress a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the Sicilian landscape visible through the tall, arched windows. She felt the weight of their gazes, assessing, calculating, wondering what the future held now that the formidable Don was gone. She felt a particular pair of eyes, however Luca's. They had been trained on her like a hawk since the moment she rose from her kneeling position, her spine a little straighter, a bit more steel in her stance. Several capo regimes, the lieutenants of Antonio's organization, approached her, their expressions a carefully crafted mixture of grief and veiled ambition. Sal DeMarco, a man with a fleshy face and eyes that held a perpetual glint of greed, was the first. Serafina, mia cara, he said, his voice thick with false sympathy. He attempted to take her hand, but she subtly withdrew it, offering him a small, tight smile instead. Antonio's loss is a blow to us all. We must discuss the future. The Famiglia needs leadership. His words were carefully chosen, but his meaning was clear. He was testing the waters, gauging her strength, her intentions. Serafina met his gaze unflinchingly. The Famiglia will endure, Sal, she said, her voice calm and steady. Antonio built a strong foundation. We will honor his memory by ensuring its continued prosperity. Her words were equally ambiguous, offering no commitment, no hint of her plans. She saw the flicker of frustration in DeMarco's eyes, quickly masked by a forced smile. He was followed by others, each attempting to subtly probe her intentions, to assess her vulnerability. Serafina parried their inquiries with the same effortless grace, revealing nothing, promising nothing. She found herself seeking out Luca's presence in the crowded room. He stood near a balcony, overlooking the gardens, his posture relaxed but alert. He was a predator in his natural habitat, observing the movements of the pack, assessing the threats and opportunities. Their eyes met across the room, and he gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the game they were both playing. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Serafina found herself alone on the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. The scent of jasmine and night-blooming cereus drifted from the gardens below, a reminder of the life she'd left behind, the life she might, just might, be able to reclaim. Luca joined her, his presence a comforting weight in the vast emptiness of the night. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her, sharing the silence. "They're vultures, Serafina," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Circling, waiting for a sign of weakness." Serafina leaned against the stone balustrade, the cool marble a soothing contrast to the heat that still lingered in her cheeks from the countless veiled conversations. "I know. Antonio, he wouldn't have wanted this for you." Luca's voice held a rare note of regret. It was a tone she hadn't often heard from him, a glimpse beneath the carefully constructed mask of the enforcer. "Antonio wanted what was best for Antonio," Serafina replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. She turned to face him, the moonlight illuminating the sharp angles of her face, the fire in her eyes. He never considered what I wanted. Luca studied her, his gaze intense and unwavering. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. "And what is it that you want, Serafina?" he asked, his voice a husky whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken desires, with years of suppressed longing. Serafina looked into his eyes, into the darkness that mirrored her own, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a different future, a future where she was not just a widow, not just a pawn, but a player in her own right. A future where she could choose her own destiny, even if that destiny was intertwined with the dangerous world of the Mafia and with the even more dangerous man standing before her. She took a breath, a shaky, unfamiliar intake of freedom. "To breathe," she answered. And something in Luca's eyes told her that he, more than anyone, understood. The night was far from over. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Crimson Legacy. The days following the funeral were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and carefully orchestrated appearances. Serafina found herself thrust into the heart of Antonio's empire, navigating a labyrinth of legal documents, financial records, and coded ledgers. It was a world she had always observed from the periphery, a world she now had to master. She discovered that Antonio's business dealings were far more complex and far more ruthless than she had ever imagined. There were legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, import-export firms that served as fronts for a vast network of illegal activities, gambling, extortion, and, she suspected, something far darker. She spent hours in Antonio's study, a room that still held the lingering scent of his cigars and the oppressive weight of his presence. The room was a testament to his power: dark wood paneling, heavy velvet drapes, a massive mahogany desk that dominated the space. It was here, surrounded by the symbols of his authority, that Serafina began to unravel the secrets of his empire. Luca was her constant companion, her guide through this treacherous landscape. He explained the intricacies of the Famiglia's operations, the delicate balance of power between the different factions, the unspoken rules that governed their world. He was her protector, her advisor, and, increasingly, her confidant. One evening, as they sat poring over a stack of ledgers, Serafina came across a series of coded entries that she couldn't decipher. The numbers didn't make sense, the references were obscure. She pushed the ledger across the desk to Luca, her brow furrowed in frustration. "What is this?" she asked. "I can't make sense of it." Luca examined the entries, his expression darkening. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his unease. "It's complicated," he said finally, his voice guarded. "It's something Antonio was involved in that wasn't strictly Famiglia business." Serafina leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What wasn't he telling me?" Luca hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. "It's better if you don't know, Serafina. It's dangerous." His reluctance only fueled her determination. "I'm not afraid of danger, Luca," she said, her voice firm. "I need to know everything. I need to understand the full extent of Antonio's legacy, the good and the bad." Luca looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew he couldn't protect her from the truth forever. He also knew that revealing it could put her in even greater danger. "It involves human trafficking," he said finally, the words a harsh whisper in the quiet room. Antonio had dealings with a group operating out of Eastern Europe. They procured young women, forced them into unspeakable things. Serafina felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had always known that Antonio was a ruthless man, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The weight of his crimson legacy pressed down on her, suffocating her. "And you knew about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Luca nodded, his expression grim. "I tried to dissuade him, Serafina. I told him it was too risky, too barbaric. But he wouldn't listen. He saw it as a lucrative opportunity." Serafina pushed back from the desk, her hands shaking. She walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city, the same lights that hid so much darkness, so much suffering. "We have to stop it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to shut it down." Luca joined her at the window, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of her emotions. "It won't be easy, Serafina. These people are powerful, well-connected. They won't give up their business without a fight." Serafina turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "Then we'll fight," she said. "We'll use Antonio's resources, his connections, to dismantle their operation. We'll expose them, bring them to justice." She knew it was a reckless plan, a dangerous gamble. But she couldn't stand idly by, knowing what was happening. She couldn't allow Antonio's legacy of cruelty to continue. She had to find a way to redeem it, to use his power for good, even if it meant risking everything. She had a purpose, a reason, and the seed of it had been planted the moment she locked eyes with the man beside her and decided to fight. The question now was, would it blossom, or would it destroy them both? Chapter 4. Shadows Cast by a Dying Sunday. The decision to dismantle Antonio's human trafficking operation marked a turning point for Serafina. It was a declaration of war, not only against the Eastern European group, but also against the elements within the Famiglia who had profited from the illicit trade. She knew she was stepping into a dangerous game, but she was no longer the passive observer, the silent wife. She was the Regina, and she would rule on her own terms. Luca, despite his initial reservations, became her unwavering ally. He used his knowledge of Antonio's network to identify the key players, the routes used to transport the women, the safe houses where they were held. He began to gather evidence, discreetly, meticulously, knowing that one wrong move could expose them both. Serafina, meanwhile, started to consolidate her own power base within the Famiglia. She met with the Capo regimes, not to ask for their approval, but to inform them of her intentions. She spoke with a quiet authority, a steely resolve that surprised even her. She made it clear that she would not tolerate any dissent, any betrayal. Some, like Sal DeMarco, were openly hostile, their ambitions thwarted by her unexpected rise to power. Others were more cautious, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. But Serafina had learned from Antonio's mistakes. She knew that fear was a powerful weapon, but loyalty, earned through respect and a shared purpose, was even stronger. She began to cultivate relationships with the younger members of the Famiglia, those who were disillusioned with the old ways, who yearned for something more than just power and profit. She offered them opportunities, a chance to be part of something different, something better. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Serafina and Luca met in a small, secluded trattoria in the heart of Palermo. It was a place they had often frequented in the past, a place where they could speak freely, away from the prying eyes and ears of the Famiglia. They sat at a corner table, a bottle of Chianti between them. The air was filled with the aroma of garlic, oregano, and simmering tomato sauce. It was a scene of ordinary life, a stark contrast to the dangerous world they inhabited. "DeMarco is making moves," Luca said, his voice low and urgent. "He's been meeting with members of the rival families, the Costellos and the Bellinis. He's trying to form an alliance against you." Serafina nodded, her expression grim. She had expected this. DeMarco was a snake, ambitious and treacherous. "We need to be prepared," she said. "We need to know who we can trust." Luca reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and reassuring, a silent promise of support. "You can trust me, Serafina," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Always." Serafina felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was more than just gratitude, it was a connection, a bond forged in the crucible of danger and shared purpose. She squeezed his hand, her heart beating a little faster. "I know," she said, her voice soft. They spent the rest of the evening discussing their strategy, planning their next moves. They knew they were walking a tightrope, that one misstep could lead to disaster. But they were in this together, bound by a shared commitment to justice and by a growing, unspoken attraction that simmered beneath the surface. As they left the trattoria, stepping out into the cool night air, Serafina felt a sense of both trepidation and exhilaration. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she was no longer alone. She had Luca by her side, and she had a purpose, a reason to fight. The shadows of the past still lingered, but a new dawn was breaking, a dawn of her own making. She was a queen ready to take on the world, and the wolves at her door would be the first to discover her sharpened teeth. But tonight, she would dream of a world without chains, and the man whose hand was a promise of something real. Chapter 5. Echoes of Betrayal in the Dark. The following weeks were a tense dance of strategy and deception. Serafina and Luca worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, cultivating allies, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with DeMarco and his cohorts. They moved in the shadows, their actions veiled in secrecy, their every conversation guarded. One evening, Luca received a coded message from one of his informants, a low-level member of the Costello family. The message indicated that DeMarco was planning a meeting with the heads of the rival families, a meeting that would likely determine Serafina's fate. "We need to know what they're planning," Serafina said, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to be one step ahead." Luca nodded, his expression grim. "I have a contact who might be able to get us inside," he said. "But it's risky. It could be a trap." Serafina didn't hesitate. "We have to take the risk," she said. "We can't afford to wait for them to make the first move." The meeting was scheduled to take place at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its clandestine activities. Luca's contact, a young man named Marco who worked as a security guard at the warehouse, agreed to provide them with access, but he warned them that security would be tight. On the night of the meeting, Serafina and Luca dressed in nondescript clothing, blending in with the shadows as they approached the warehouse. The air was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the distant sounds of the city. Marco met them at a side entrance, his face pale with nervousness. He led them through a maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. They reached a small, dimly lit room overlooking the main warehouse floor. From here, they could see and hear everything that was happening below. DeMarco was already there, along with Donatello Costello and Isabella Bellini, the heads of the rival families. They were seated around a large table, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of a single overhead light. The air was thick with cigar smoke, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken threats. Serafina and Luca listened intently, their hearts pounding in their chests. They heard DeMarco outline his plan to overthrow Serafina, to seize control of the Mancini Empire. He spoke of her weakness, her inexperience, her unsuitability to lead. He promised Costello and Bellini a share of the spoils, a chance to expand their own territories. Costello and Bellini were hesitant at first, wary of DeMarco's ambition, of the potential consequences of challenging the Mancini family. But DeMarco was persuasive, his words dripping with venom and promises of power. He played on their greed, their resentment of Antonio's dominance, their desire for revenge. As Serafina listened, she felt a cold fury building inside her. She had underestimated DeMarco's treachery, his willingness to betray everything Antonio had built. She had also underestimated the depth of the resentment against her, the perception of her as a weak and vulnerable target. Suddenly, Luca gripped her arm, his eyes narrowed. "Something's not right," he whispered. "Look at Marco." Serafina followed his gaze. Marco, who had been standing nervously by the door, was now speaking into a small, concealed microphone. He was betraying them. Before Serafina or Luca could react, the door to the room burst open, and armed guards stormed in. They were surrounded. DeMarco's smug face appeared in the doorway, a triumphant sneer playing on his lips. "Welcome, Serafina," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm so glad you could join us." Serafina met his gaze unflinchingly, her chin lifted in defiance. She had walked into a trap, but she would not go down without a fight. She had Luca by her side, and she had the fire of 1,000 betrayed ancestors burning in her veins. She had seconds, maybe less, and only one chance. This was it. Chapter 6. the scent of gunpowder and regret. The warehouse, moments before a haven of clandestine observation, had transformed into a cage. Armed guards, their faces grim and unyielding, surrounded Serafina and Luca. The air, once thick with cigar smoke and the murmur of conspiracy, now crackled with the imminent threat of violence. The scent of gunpowder, sharp and acrid, mingled with the lingering aroma of stale coffee and betrayal. DeMarco's triumphant sneer widened as he savored the moment. "Did you really think you could outsmart me, Kara?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "You may have inherited Antonio's throne, but you lack his cunning." Serafina remained silent, her eyes fixed on DeMarco. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Her mind raced, assessing the situation, searching for an escape, a weakness in their seemingly impenetrable position. Luca stood beside her, his body tense, his hand subtly moving towards the small pistol concealed beneath his jacket. He knew that any sudden move could trigger a bloodbath, but he wouldn't hesitate to defend Serafina, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. "I underestimated your treachery, Sal," Serafina said finally, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "But I won't underestimate your stupidity." DeMarco's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of anger. "Stupidity?" he hissed. "I am the one who holds all the cards, Serafina. You are at my mercy." "Mercy?" Serafina echoed, a hint of scorn in her voice. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You're a coward, Sal, hiding behind your hired guns, betraying the family that gave you everything." Her words struck a nerve. DeMarco's face flushed with rage, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. "Enough." Donatello Costello, the head of the Costello family, intervened. His voice was sharp, commanding. "This is not how we do business, DeMarco. We agreed to a discussion, not a slaughter." Isabella Bellini, the head of the Bellini family, nodded in agreement. "We have no quarrel with Serafina," she said, her gaze shifting toward Serafina. "Our grievance was with Antonio. He is gone. We see no reason for further bloodshed." DeMarco glared at Costello and Bellini, his carefully constructed alliance crumbling before his eyes. He had miscalculated, overplayed his hand. He had underestimated the ingrained code of honor, however twisted, that still existed within the Mafia world. "You betray me?" DeMarco stammered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We uphold the traditions," Costello replied coldly. "We do not kill women, especially not the widow of a Don, unless provoked." "You have provided insufficient provocation, DeMarco." Serafina seized the opportunity. She stepped forward, her gaze locking with Costello and Bellini. "Antonio is gone," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "But the Mancini family remains. I offer you a choice, peace or war. Choose wisely." Costello and Bellini exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power. They had come to the meeting expecting to negotiate with a weak and vulnerable widow. Instead, they were faced with a woman who commanded respect, who held the loyalty of her husband's most trusted enforcer, and who was not afraid to fight for what was hers. "We choose peace," Costello said finally, his voice firm. "We have no desire to engage in a war we cannot win." Bellini nodded in agreement. "We will honor the old agreements, Serafina. We will respect your territory, your authority." DeMarco watched in stunned silence as his plan unraveled. He was isolated, defeated, his ambition turned to ashes. He had underestimated Serafina, and he had paid the price. Serafina turned to Luca, a subtle nod passing between them. The immediate danger had passed, but the game was far from over. They had won this battle, but the war for control of the Mancini Empire was just beginning. The air filled now with the metallic hint of what could have been, and a regret so thick, it was hard to tell whose it was. Serafina was already moving towards the exit. Luca fell in step next to her, his eyes searching. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice barely a murmur, but edged with something she hadn't heard before. Serafina nodded. "Just a little shaken," she admitted, then looked up at him, something fierce burning in her eyes. But not broken. It was the truth. And it was only the beginning. Chapter 7. A Dance with the Devil's Advocate. The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation left Serafina with a solidified, albeit precarious, hold on the Mancini empire. Costello and Bellini, having publicly declared their neutrality, retreated to their respective territories. DeMarco, stripped of his allies and facing the wrath of the remaining Cape regimes loyal to Serafina, had disappeared into the shadows, his threat diminished, but not entirely extinguished. Serafina knew that she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. She had won a temporary reprieve, but the underlying tensions within the Famiglia remained. She needed to consolidate her power, to prove that she was not just Antonio's widow, but a leader in her own right. Luca remained her steadfast ally, his loyalty unquestioned, his counsel invaluable. He helped her navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries, identifying those who could be trusted and those who still posed a threat. One evening, as they were reviewing the Famiglia's financial records, Serafina noticed a series of discrepancies, a pattern of transactions that didn't quite add up. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it raised a nagging suspicion in her mind. "Luca," she said, pointing to a specific entry in the ledger. "What do you make of this?" Luca examined the entry, his brow furrowing. He traced the flow of funds, cross-referencing it with other documents, his mind working like a well-oiled machine. "It's clever," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "Someone is skimming money from the legitimate businesses, diverting it to offshore accounts. It's been happening for years, under Antonio's nose." Serafina felt a surge of anger. She had suspected that Antonio's empire was built on a foundation of corruption, but this was a direct betrayal, a theft from the Famiglia itself. "Who?" she asked, her voice tight, with controlled fury. "Who would dare to do this?"
Luca hesitated.
"I have my suspicions," he said, "but I need more evidence. It could be someone close to you." His words sent a chill down Serafina's spine. The possibility of betrayal from within her inner circle was a bitter pill to swallow. She had trusted these people, relied on them. "We need to be careful," Luca said, his hand reaching out to cover hers. "We can't trust anyone until we know the truth." Over the next few days, Serafina and Luca embarked on a discreet investigation, their movements cloaked in secrecy. They followed the money trail, piecing together the puzzle, their suspicions growing with each new discovery. The evidence pointed to one person, Alessandro Rossi, Serafina's uncle, Antonio's brother-in-law. He had always been a trusted advisor, a confidant, a member of the family. He had helped Serafina navigate the complexities of the Famiglia after Antonio's death, offering her support and guidance. The realization hit Serafina like a physical blow. She had trusted Alessandro, confided in him, relied on his wisdom. The thought that he had been betraying her, stealing from her, was almost unbearable. She confronted Alessandro in Antonio's study, the room where she had first begun to unravel the secrets of her husband's empire. She presented him with the evidence, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. Alessandro initially denied the accusations, his face a mask of injured innocence. But as Serafina laid out the facts, his facade crumbled. He confessed, his voice filled with shame and regret. He claimed he had been forced into it, that he had been blackmailed by a rival family, that he had acted out of fear for his life. Serafina listened to his excuses, her heart torn between pity and rage. She wanted to believe him, to forgive him. But she knew that she couldn't afford to be naive. She had to make a decision that would not only determine Alessandro's fate, but also send a message to the rest of the Famiglia. She looked at Luca, a silent plea for help, but his expression was like stone. This was her choice. "Get out," she said at last, her voice trembling. "Leave this house, and never come back." She couldn't bear to look at him another second. The dance was over. Chapter 8. Broken Vows and Silent Promises. Alessandro's banishment sent ripples of shock and unease throughout the Famiglia. It was a clear demonstration of Serafina's power, her willingness to punish even those closest to her. It was also a painful reminder of the pervasive nature of betrayal, the constant threat that lurked beneath the surface of their seemingly ordered world. Serafina retreated into herself, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She had lost another piece of her past, another connection to the life she had once known. The isolation of her position, the burden of leadership, pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. Luca was her only solace, her constant companion in the storm. He understood her pain, her sense of loss, her growing disillusionment. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. He simply was there, a solid presence, a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of her emotions. One evening, Serafina found herself wandering through the gardens of the villa, the scent of night-blooming jasmine a bittersweet reminder of her childhood, of a time before the darkness had consumed her. She reached a small, secluded grotto, a place where she had often sought refuge as a young girl. Luca found her there, sitting on a stone bench, her gaze fixed on the moonlit waters of a small fountain. He sat beside her, not speaking, simply sharing the silence. "I feel lost," Serafina said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Like I'm adrift at sea, with no compass, no stars to guide me." Luca gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're not lost, Serafina," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You have a purpose, a strength that you're only beginning to discover. You're not alone." Serafina looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. She saw the unwavering loyalty in his gaze, the unspoken promise of support. She also saw something else, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, for years. A deep, abiding affection, a connection that transcended the boundaries of their roles, of their past. "Antonio, he made me promise on our wedding day that I would always be loyal to the famiglia," she said, her voice trembling. "That I would put its interests above my own, above everything." Luca nodded, his expression grim.
I know.
He had been there, a silent witness to that solemn vow, a vow that had bound Serafina to a life of duty, of sacrifice. "But what if the famiglia is not what I thought it was?" Serafina asked, her voice filled with doubt. What if my loyalty is misplaced?" Luca tightened his grip on her hand. "Your loyalty should be to yourself, Serafina," he said, his voice firm. "To your own conscience, to your own sense of what is right. You are the Regina now. You make the rules." His words resonated deep within her, a liberating truth that she had been afraid to acknowledge. She was no longer bound by Antonio's vows, by his expectations. She was free to choose her own path, to define her own destiny. She leaned closer to Luca, drawn to his strength, his unwavering presence. She reached out, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, the rough stubble of his jaw. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He simply held her gaze, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Luca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He leaned in, his breath warm against her cheek. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then, he closed the distance between them, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tentative touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was a kiss of shared grief, of unspoken longing, of a connection that had been forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal. It was a kiss that shattered the remnants of her old life, of her broken vows, and opened the door to a new, uncertain future. It was a promise.
Of what she did not know.
But the scent of jasmine, the soft moonlight, and Luca's hand on her skin were a start. A silent vow, passing between them, on the heels of so many broken ones. Chapter 9. The lioness bears her claws. The kiss between Serafina and Luca, though tentative and fleeting, marked a profound shift in their relationship. It was a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that had simmered beneath the surface, a crossing of a boundary that had, until now, seemed insurmountable. It also added a new layer of complexity to their already dangerous world, a vulnerability that could be exploited by their enemies. They didn't speak of it, not explicitly. Their lives were too consumed by the demands of the famiglia, by the constant threat of betrayal and violence. But the memory of that kiss lingered between them, a shared secret, a silent promise that hung in the air. It changed the way they looked at each other, the way they touched, the way they communicated. There was a new intimacy, a deeper understanding, a bond that transcended the roles they had played for so long. Serafina, emboldened by this newfound connection, began to assert her authority with even greater confidence. She had banished Alessandro, neutralized DeMarco, and secured the tentative neutrality of the rival families. Now, she turned her attention to the internal workings of the Famiglia, determined to root out the corruption and cruelty that had festered under Antonio's reign. She implemented new policies, stricter controls on the businesses, a zero-tolerance approach to any form of exploitation or abuse. She invested in community projects, schools, hospitals, creating opportunities for the people who had long been marginalized and oppressed by the Mafia's activities. She was building a new kind of Famiglia, one based on respect, justice, and a shared sense of purpose. Her actions, however, did not go unnoticed. There were those within the Famiglia, the old guard, who resented her reforms, who saw her as a threat to their power and privilege. They whispered in the shadows, plotting their revenge, waiting for an opportunity to strike. One evening, Serafina received a cryptic message, a single black rose delivered to her villa, its petals tinged with a dark, ominous red. It was a clear threat, a warning from those who opposed her. Luca, upon seeing the rose, his face darkened with concern. "This is a declaration of war, Serafina," he said, his voice grim. "They're challenging you, testing your resolve." Serafina held the rose in her hand, her fingers tracing the velvety petals. She felt a surge of anger, but also a steely determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. "Then let them come," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "I'm not afraid of them." She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, that her enemies were closing in. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had Luca by her side, and she had the growing support of those within the Famiglia who believed in her vision, who were tired of the old ways. She called a meeting of the Cape regimes, summoning them to the villa. She addressed them with a newfound authority, her gaze sweeping across their faces, assessing their loyalty, their resolve. "I know there are those among you who oppose me," she said, her voice resonating through the room, "who believe I am weak, who cling to the old ways. But I tell you this, the old ways are dead. Antonio is gone. I am the Regina now, and I will rule on my own terms." She outlined her vision for the Famiglia, her plans for reform, her commitment to justice. She challenged them to choose a side, to stand with her or against her. Some remained silent, their faces unreadable. Others, emboldened by her strength, voiced their support, pledging their loyalty. The lines were drawn. The battle was about to begin. As the meeting concluded, Serafina felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had bared her claws, shown her teeth. She had declared herself a force to be reckoned with. She'd thrown the rose back at them, thorns and all. The scent of it filled the air now, almost stronger than the apprehension. Almost. She was ready. Chapter 10. Masks of Deceit and Desire. The open defiance displayed at the Cape regime's meeting ignited a powder keg within the Famiglia. While Serafina had garnered support, the undercurrent of dissent grew stronger, fueled by those who clung to the old ways, those who saw her reforms as a threat to their power and illicit gains. The Black Rose had been a gauntlet thrown down, and now, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Serafina knew she had to act swiftly and decisively. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, any hesitation. With Luca's help, she began to identify the key players in the opposition, the Cape regimes who were secretly plotting against her. It was a delicate dance of intelligence gathering, of uncovering hidden alliances and secret betrayals. One name that surfaced repeatedly was Giovanni Rizzo, a seasoned Cape regime known for his ruthlessness and his close ties to the Eastern European trafficking ring. Rizzo had been a staunch supporter of Antonio, and he had profited handsomely from the illicit trade. Serafina suspected he was the mastermind behind the Black Rose, the driving force behind the growing resistance. She decided to confront Rizzo directly, to lay her cards on the table. She invited him to a private meeting at a neutral location, a small, unassuming restaurant in the heart of Palermo. It was a risky move, but Serafina believed in facing her enemies head-on. The meeting was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Rizzo arrived with 2 bodyguards, their presence a clear indication of his distrust. Serafina, in turn, had Luca by her side, his hand never far from the pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "Giovanni," Serafina began, her voice calm and steady. "We have a problem." Rizzo raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Do we, Regina?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I wasn't aware of any problem." "The Black Rose," Serafina said, her gaze unflinching. "The whispers in the shadows. The resistance to my reforms. You're behind it, aren't you?" Rizzo's smirk widened. "You have no proof, Serafina," he said. "These are just rumors, baseless accusations." "I have eyes and ears everywhere, Giovanni," Serafina countered. "I know about your dealings with the Eastern Europeans. I know about your opposition to my plans. I know you're plotting against me." Rizzo's facade of nonchalance began to crack. He shifted uneasily in his chair, his eyes darting towards his bodyguards. "You're playing a dangerous game, Serafina," he said, his voice losing its edge. "You're making enemies you can't afford to make." "I'm not afraid of you, Giovanni," Serafina said, her voice cold and unwavering. "I'm not afraid of anyone. I'm here to clean up this famiglia, to rid it of the corruption and cruelty that has festered for too long. And I won't let anyone stand in my way." She leaned forward, her gaze locking with Rizzo's. "I offer you a choice, Giovanni," she said. "Loyalty or exile. Choose wisely." Rizzo stared at her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was caught between his loyalty to the old ways and his fear of Serafina's growing power. He knew that defying her could be a fatal mistake, but he also that he knew her ambition, and that made her dangerous. After a long, tense silence, Rizzo finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Loyalty," he said, his gaze dropping to the table. Serafina nodded, a subtle signal to Luca to relax. She had won this round, but she knew it was a temporary victory. Rizzo's loyalty was fragile, born of fear, not respect. She would have to watch him closely. As they left the restaurant, the tension began to dissolve, replaced by a growing heat between Serafina and Luca, an unspoken desire that had been simmering beneath the surface. The masks they wore for the world, of Regina and Enforcer, began to slip, revealing the vulnerable humans beneath. Tonight, those human were famished, and they had been denying themselves for far too long. The night was far from over, and the masks had a long way to fall. Chapter 11. Beneath the Veil of Morning. The confrontation with Rizzo, though seemingly a victory, left Serafina feeling drained and emotionally raw. The constant vigilance, the ever-present threat of betrayal, were taking their toll. She found herself increasingly relying on Luca, not just for his strategic advice and protection, but for his emotional support, his unwavering presence in a world that seemed to be constantly shifting beneath her feet. That evening, back at the villa, Serafina found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, the tension, the threats, the precariousness of her position. She wandered through the darkened rooms, the silence of the vast house amplifying her sense of isolation. She found Luca in the library, a room filled with Antonio's collection of antique books, a room that had always felt oppressive, a symbol of his controlling presence. He was standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned as she entered, his expression softening as he saw her. He didn't speak, simply held out his hand, an invitation. Serafina took his hand, the warmth of his touch a comforting anchor in the storm of her emotions. He led her to a small seating area near the fireplace, where a low fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant murmur of the city. Serafina felt the tension slowly ebbing from her body, replaced by a sense of peace, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. "I'm tired, Luca," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Tired of the fighting, the scheming, the constant threat of betrayal." Luca nodded, his gaze understanding. "I know," he said, his voice low and soothing. "It's a heavy burden, Serafina. A burden you shouldn't have to carry alone." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the lines of her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, savoring the simple comfort of his presence. Sometimes I wish I could just run away," she said, her voice filled with a longing she hadn't dared to express before. "Leave all this behind, start a new life, somewhere far away from here." Luca's hand stilled. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and sadness. "And would you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Would you leave it all behind?" Serafina opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. She saw the unspoken question in his eyes, the fear of losing her, the hope that she might choose a different path, a path that included him. She thought of the life she had left behind, the life of books and lemon trees, the life of simple pleasures, of peace and tranquility. She thought of the life she had now, the life of power and danger, of constant struggle and uncertain rewards. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice honest and raw. "I don't know what I want anymore." Luca pulled her closer, his arm encircling her waist, drawing her against his chest. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body. "You don't have to decide tonight, Serafina," he said, his voice a soothing murmur against her hair. "Just rest. Let me take care of you for tonight." His words were a balm to her soul, a promise of respite, of a moment of peace in the midst of the storm. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to surrender to his embrace, to the feeling of safety and comfort that he offered. The veil of mourning that had shrouded her for so long began to lift, revealing the woman beneath, the woman who yearned for connection, for love, for a life beyond the confines of her gilded cage. It fell to the floor, and Luca's lips found hers again. Only this time, there was no tentativeness, no hesitation. It was a kiss of deep longing, of shared pain, of a love that had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to ignite. It was a long night, and the dawn would bring new challenges. But for now, this was enough. Chapter 12. The cold embrace of power. The intimacy shared between Serafina and Luca, though a source of comfort and strength, also created a new vulnerability. Their relationship, still hidden from the world, became a precious secret, a fragile flame that needed to be protected from the harsh winds of the Mafia world. They were careful, discreet, their moments together stolen, their conversations guarded. Serafina, despite the emotional turmoil, continued to consolidate her power, to implement her reforms, to reshape the famiglia in her own image. She faced resistance at every turn, from the old guard who resented her changes, from the rival families who saw her as a threat, from the lingering influence of Antonio's legacy. One of the most pressing challenges was the ongoing investigation into the human trafficking operation. Serafina, with Luca's help, had managed to gather significant evidence, identifying key players, uncovering the routes used to transport the women, exposing the network of corruption that allowed the operation to flourish. She knew she couldn't bring this evidence to the authorities. The police were riddled with corruption, many of them on Antonio's payroll. She had to find another way, a way to dismantle the operation from within, to use the famiglia's own resources, its own power, to achieve justice. She decided to take a bold, risky step. She called a meeting of all the capo regimes, including those who were suspected of being involved in the trafficking operation. She presented them with the evidence, her voice cold and unwavering, her gaze sweeping across their faces, assessing their reactions. This abomination ends now," she declared, her voice resonating through the room. "I will not tolerate the exploitation of innocent women. I will not allow this famiglia to be stained by such cruelty. She outlined her plan to shut down the operation, to sever all ties with the Eastern European group, to offer protection and support to the victims. She made it clear that anyone who opposed her, anyone who continued to participate in the trafficking, would face her wrath. The reaction was mixed. Some, the younger Capo regimes who had embraced her reforms, voiced their support. Others, the old guard, remained silent, their faces masks of resentment and defiance. Giovanni Rizzo, his loyalty still uncertain, watched her with a calculating gaze. The meeting ended without a clear resolution, the tension in the room palpable. Serafina knew she had planted a seed, but she also knew that the battle was far from over. She had challenged the very foundation of Antonio's empire, and she had made powerful enemies. As she left the meeting, Luca fell into step beside her, his presence a reassuring constant in the storm. "You are magnificent, Serafina," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You have the heart of a lioness." Serafina smiled, a fleeting expression of gratitude. "But the lioness is surrounded by wolves," she said, her voice tinged with weariness. "And I'm not sure how long she can hold them at bay." Luca's arm found its way to hers. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but the meaning was clear. "Then we'll find a way, together, to make them submit." His confidence gave her strength, even if the chill of the room of this newfound power still lingered on her skin. The embrace of power was cold, indeed, but the warmth of Luca, beside her, made it bearable. She had a feeling she would need all of his warmth for what was coming. Chapter 13. A Pact Forged in Moonlight. The decision to dismantle the human trafficking operation, while morally imperative, had destabilized the already fragile balance of power within the famiglia. Serafina knew that she was walking a tightrope, that one wrong move could trigger a full-blown war. She needed allies, strong and reliable allies who would stand by her, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. She turned to the younger Capo regimes, those who had shown a willingness to embrace her reforms, those who were disillusioned with the old ways. She met with them individually, in secret, forging personal connections, building trust, appealing to their sense of honor, of justice. One of these Capo regimes was Marco Bellini, the son of Isabella Bellini, the head of the rival Bellini family. Marco was different from his mother, more idealistic, more compassionate. He had witnessed the brutality of the Mafia world firsthand, and he yearned for something different, something better. Serafina had met Marco briefly during the warehouse confrontation, and she had sensed a kindred spirit, a shared desire for change. She decided to reach out to him, to offer him an alliance. She arranged a meeting at a secluded location, a small, abandoned chapel on the outskirts of Palermo. It was a risky move, meeting with the son of a rival family, but Serafina believed that Marco could be a valuable ally. Marco arrived alone, his expression wary but curious. He had heard of Serafina's reforms, of her defiance of the old guard. He was intrigued, but also cautious. Serafina didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out her vision for the famiglia, her plans to eradicate the corruption and cruelty, her commitment to building a new kind of organization, one based on respect and justice. "I know this is a radical departure from the way things have always been done," she said, her voice earnest and sincere. "But I believe it's the only way forward. The old ways are destroying us, corrupting our souls." Marco listened intently, his gaze searching hers. He saw the fire in her eyes, the determination in her voice. He saw a woman who was willing to risk everything to achieve her goals. "I believe you, Serafina," he said finally, his voice filled with a newfound conviction. "I've seen too much darkness, too much suffering. I want to be part of something different, something better." He offered her his support, his loyalty, his willingness to help her dismantle the trafficking operation, to fight against the old guard. It was a pact forged in moonlight, a secret alliance that could change the course of the famiglia's future. As Marco left, Serafina felt a surge of hope. She had found a powerful ally, a kindred spirit who shared her vision. She was not alone in her fight. Luca, who had been waiting outside the chapel, joined her, his expression questioning. "He's with us," Serafina said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Marco Bellini has pledged his support." Luca nodded, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "That's unexpected," he said. "But it could be a game changer. The Bellinis have significant influence." They walked back towards the city, the moon casting long shadows before them. The air was cool and crisp, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps. "We're building something new, Luca," Serafina said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "Something that will be tested. Something that will endure." He slipped his hand in hers, and she met his eyes, and the pact between them was renewed. It was a promise, written not on paper, signed not in blood, but forged in the moonlight of a shared destiny. Tonight, the wolves could howl. She had found her pack. Chapter 14. The Price of Loyalty and Love. The alliance with Marco Bellini proved to be a turning point in Serafina's struggle for control of the Famiglia. His support gave her a significant advantage, both in terms of manpower and influence. It also sent a clear message to the old guard, those who were still resisting her reforms, that their time was running out. However, the alliance also came at a price. Isabella Bellini, Marco's mother, was not pleased with her son's decision. She saw Serafina as a threat, a destabilizing force that could undermine the traditional power structures of the Mafia world. She had agreed to a truce with Serafina, but she had not given up her ambition, her desire for revenge against the Mancini family. Isabella sent a message to Serafina, demanding a meeting. Serafina, despite Luca's warnings, agreed. She knew that she couldn't avoid a confrontation forever. She had to face Isabella, to try to find some common ground, some way to prevent a full-blown war. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a grand, decaying palazzo that had once belonged to a noble family. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Isabella arrived with her own entourage, a group of hardened capo regimes who radiated menace. "Serafina," Isabella greeted her, her voice cold and formal. "You have disrupted the balance of power. You have interfered in matters that do not concern you." "I have done what is right, Isabella," Serafina replied, her voice equally firm. "I will not tolerate the exploitation of innocent people. I will not allow this famiglia to be stained by such cruelty." "You speak of morality, Regina?" Isabella scoffed. "You, who are married to the legacy of Antonio Mancini. You, who have inherited his empire of blood and sin." "Antonio is gone," Serafina said, her gaze unflinching. "I am building a new legacy, a legacy of justice, of respect." "You are naive, Serafina," Isabella said, her voice dripping with scorn. "You cannot change the nature of this world. You cannot erase the past. You can only adapt or be destroyed." "I choose to fight," Serafina said, her voice ringing with defiance. "I choose to build a better future, even if it means risking everything." The meeting ended in a stalemate, neither woman willing to concede. Isabella made it clear that she would not tolerate any further interference in her affairs, that she would protect her family's interests, even if it meant going to war. As Serafina left the palazzo, she felt a growing sense of unease. She had underestimated Isabella's resolve, her ruthlessness. She had also underestimated the depth of the divisions within the famiglia, the lingering loyalty to the old ways. Luca, sensing her distress, placed a comforting hand on her arm. "It's not over, Serafina," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "We'll find a way. We always do." His words gave her a small measure of comfort, but she knew that the path ahead was becoming increasingly treacherous. The price of loyalty, the price of her ambition to change the famiglia, was rising. And the price of her love for Luca, a love that was forbidden, that could destroy them both, was becoming almost unbearable. That night, she held Luca close, desperate for his touch, for the feeling of safety and connection that he offered. The world outside was closing in, the threats were multiplying, but in his arms, she found a moment of peace, a moment of respite from the storm. But the storm, she knew, was coming, and she had a sickening feeling that not everyone would survive it. The price, it seemed, was about to be collected. Chapter 15. Scars of the past, flames of the future. The fragile peace Serafina had brokered was shattered by a sudden, brutal act of violence. A bomb, planted in a car belonging to one of her closest allies, exploded in the heart of Palermo, killing the Capo regime and several innocent bystanders. It was a clear message, a declaration of war from those who opposed her reforms, those who clung to the old ways. The bombing sent shockwaves through the Famiglia, fear and uncertainty gripping every member. Serafina knew that she had to respond swiftly and decisively to show that she would not be intimidated, that she would not back down. Luca, his face grim with anger and concern, urged her to go into hiding, to leave Palermo until the situation could be brought under control. But Serafina refused. She would not run. She would not cower. She would face her enemies head-on. "They want to scare me, Luca," she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve. "They want to break me, but they will fail. I will not let them win." She ordered a lockdown of the Famiglia's territories, tightening security, deploying her loyal Capo regimes to key locations. She also launched her own investigation into the bombing, determined to find those responsible and bring them to justice. The evidence pointed to a coalition of forces, disgruntled members of the old guard, led by Giovanni Rizzo, who had secretly broken his vow of loyalty, elements of the rival Costello family, seeking to exploit the chaos and expand their own territory, and, most disturbingly, a shadowy figure from Antonio's past, a man known only as Il Lupo the Wolf, a ruthless mercenary with a reputation for extreme violence. Serafina realized that she was facing a formidable enemy, a coalition of forces that had united to destroy her. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing betrayal from within her own ranks. But she also had something that her enemies didn't: the unwavering loyalty of Luca, the support of Marco Bellini and his faction, and the growing belief among the younger Capo regimes that her vision for a new Famiglia, a Famiglia free from corruption and cruelty, was worth fighting for. She called a meeting of her loyal supporters, gathering them in the villa, the same room where she had first declared her intention to claim her throne. She addressed them with a fiery passion, her voice ringing with conviction. "They have declared war on us," she said, her gaze sweeping across their faces. "They have attacked us, killed our brothers and sisters. But we will not yield. We will not be broken. We will fight back, with every ounce of our strength, with every fiber of our being." She outlined her plan, a daring, risky strategy to strike at the heart of the enemy coalition, to expose their crimes, to dismantle their operations. It was a gamble, but Serafina believed it was the only way to win, the only way to secure a future for the Famiglia, for herself, and for the man she loved. As the meeting concluded, Serafina felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was stepping into the flames, embracing the danger, knowing that the outcome was uncertain. She was walking into her past, Antonio's past, and hoping to emerge with a new future forged in the fire. Luca approached her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. He took her hand, his touch a silent promise of unwavering support. The scars of their past were etched deep, but the flames of their future burned bright. And tonight, they burned brighter than ever. The question now was who and what would be left when the smoke cleared. Chapter 16. The Unseen Threads of Destiny. Serafina's plan to strike back at the enemy coalition was audacious and fraught with peril. It involved a multi-pronged approach, exposing Rizzo's treachery to the remaining Capo regimes, disrupting the Costello family's operations, and, most dangerously, confronting Il Lupo, the shadowy mercenary who had been hired to eliminate her. The first step was to deal with Rizzo. Serafina, with Luca's help, had gathered irrefutable evidence of his involvement in the bombing, his betrayal of the Famiglia, his continued dealings with the Eastern European trafficking ring. She presented this evidence to a secret gathering of the Capo regimes, those who were still undecided, those who were wavering in their loyalty. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Rizzo's carefully constructed facade of loyalty crumbled, revealing the ruthless, ambitious man beneath. The Capo regimes, faced with the truth, turned against him, their allegiance shifting to Serafina. Rizzo, stripped of his support, was quickly apprehended, his fate sealed. The next step was to disrupt the Costello family's operations. Marco Bellini, using his inside knowledge of their network, provided Serafina with crucial information, allowing her to launch a series of coordinated attacks on their businesses, their supply lines, their sources of income. The Costellos, caught off guard, suffered significant losses, their power weakened, their ability to wage war against Serafina diminished. But the most dangerous task remained, confronting Il Lupo. Luca, knowing the mercenary's reputation for brutality and cunning, urged Serafina to let him handle it, to send a team of experienced Capo regimes to eliminate him. But Serafina refused. She would not send others to do her dirty work. She would face Il Lupo herself. She learned, through a network of informants, that Il Lupo was hiding in a secluded villa in the mountains outside Palermo. She decided to go there alone, accompanied only by Luca. It was a reckless decision, a gamble that could cost them their lives. But Serafina felt a strange sense of destiny, a feeling that this confrontation was inevitable, that it was a necessary step in her journey to claim her throne, to break free from the shadows of the past. They drove to the villa under cover of darkness, the tension in the car thick and suffocating. Luca, his face grim, his hand never far from his pistol, tried to dissuade her, to convince her to turn back. But Serafina was resolute, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her mind focused on the task at hand. As they approached the villa, they saw that it was heavily guarded, armed men patrolling the perimeter, their faces hidden in the shadows. Serafina and Luca knew that they were walking into a trap, but they had come too far to turn back. They had to face Il Lupo, to end his reign of terror, to sever the final link to Antonio's dark legacy. The threads of destiny, unseen but powerful, were drawing them closer to a confrontation that would determine not only their fate, but the fate of the famiglia, of the future they were fighting to build. It felt, to Serafina, as if everything had been leading to this moment, to this showdown. It was time. Chapter 17. Where honor and treachery meet. The approach to Il Lupo's villa was a tense, silent affair. Serafina and Luca, armed and alert, moved through the shadows, their senses heightened, their every step calculated. They bypassed the perimeter guards, using their knowledge of the terrain, their training, their shared understanding of the art of stealth. They reached the villa, a sprawling, modern structure that contrasted sharply with the rugged beauty of the surrounding mountains. It was a fortress, designed to withstand any attack, but Serafina and Luca were not deterred. They had come too far, faced too many challenges, to be stopped now. They entered the villa through a side entrance, a secret passage that Luca had discovered through his network of informants. They moved through the darkened corridors, their footsteps silent on the polished marble floors, their weapons drawn, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found Il Lupo in a large, opulent study, a room filled with expensive furniture, antique weapons, and trophies of his violent past. He was sitting behind a massive desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a mask of cold indifference. He was an older man, his hair graying, his eyes filled with a chilling emptiness, a void where his soul should have been. Serafina Mancini, he greeted her, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I've been expecting you." "Il Lupo," Serafina replied, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Il Lupo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You are naive, Regina," he said. "You think you can defeat me? You, a woman who has only recently discovered her claws?" "I am not alone," Serafina said, her hand subtly gesturing towards Luca, who stood silently beside her, his pistol trained on Il Lupo. Il Lupo's gaze shifted to Luca, a flicker of recognition in his eyes.
"Ah, yes," he said.
"The loyal dog. Antonio's shadow. I should have killed you years ago." "You had your chance," Luca replied, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Enough talk," Serafina said, her patience wearing thin. You're here because of Antonio, because of the past. But the past is dead. I am the future. Il Lupo smiled, a cruel, twisted expression that sent a shiver down Serafina's spine. The past is never dead, Regina, he said. It lingers, it festers, it returns to haunt us. He reached into a drawer of his desk, his hand emerging with a small, antique pistol. He pointed it at Serafina, his finger tightening on the trigger. You are Antonio's legacy, he said, his voice filled with a venomous hatred. And I will erase that legacy, starting with you. Before Il Lupo could fire, Luca moved with lightning speed, his own pistol barking, the sound echoing through the room. Il Lupo staggered back, his shot going wild, his body collapsing to the floor, his lifeblood staining the expensive carpet. The confrontation was over, swiftly, brutally. Il Lupo, the symbol of Antonio's dark past, was dead. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the violence, by the lingering presence of the past. Serafina stood over Il Lupo's body, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had faced her demons, confronted her past, and she had survived. But the scars remained, deep and painful. It was at this precise moment of triumph, of loss, of devastating sorrow, that she realized that the line between honor and treachery was thinner than any of them could have ever conceived. It was quite possibly non-existent. And that changed everything. Chapter 18. The Heart's Reckoning. The death of Il Lupo, while a significant victory, left Serafina with a profound sense of emptiness. She had eliminated a threat, severed a link to Antonio's brutal past, but the act of violence, the taking of a life, had left a stain on her soul. She found herself questioning her choices, her methods, her ability to truly change the Famiglia, to create a future free from the darkness that had consumed it for so long. Luca, sensing her turmoil, tried to comfort her, to reassure her that she had done what was necessary, that she had acted to protect herself, to protect the Famiglia. But Serafina couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the sense that she was becoming the very thing she had sworn to fight against. She retreated into herself, withdrawing from the demands of leadership, spending hours alone in the villa's gardens, seeking solace in the beauty of nature, in the quiet solitude of the night. She avoided Luca, not out of anger or resentment, but out of a deep-seated fear that her darkness would consume him, that her love would be a curse, a burden that he didn't deserve. Luca, however, refused to let her isolate herself. He understood her pain, her guilt, her self-doubt. He had witnessed the darkness firsthand, had participated in it himself. He knew that the only way to overcome it was to face it together, to confront the demons of the past and build a new future, a future based on love, on trust, on a shared commitment to a better way. One evening, he found her in the grotto, the same place where they had shared their first kiss, the place where she had confessed her longing for a different life. He sat beside her, not speaking, simply offering his presence, his unwavering support. I don't know if I can do this, Luca, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can be the leader they need, the woman you deserve. Luca gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You are stronger than you think, Serafina, he said, his voice low and earnest. You have faced unimaginable challenges, overcome insurmountable obstacles. You have the heart of a lioness, the soul of a queen. He leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers. And you are the woman I love, he said, his voice filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. Because you have seen the darkness, and you have chosen to fight for the light. His words, his unwavering belief in her, pierced through the walls she had built around her heart. She saw the love in his eyes, the unconditional acceptance, the promise of a future where they could heal together, where they could build a new legacy, a legacy of love and redemption. She leaned into his embrace, her tears flowing freely, tears of grief, of guilt, but also of hope, of a newfound sense of purpose. She had been lost, adrift at sea, but she had found her anchor, her guiding star, in Luca's love. "I love you, Luca," she whispered, her voice filled with a raw emotion that she had suppressed for too long. "I love you more than words can say." He kissed her then, a kiss of deep passion, of shared pain, of a love that had been forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a promise to face the future together, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead, to build a new life, a new famiglia, a new world. It was a reckoning of the heart of the soul. And for the first time in a long time, Serafina felt at peace, her soul finally exposed. But peace, she knew, was always fleeting, especially in her world. The reckoning, however, was here to stay. Chapter 19. A Kingdom Built on Secrets. With Il Lupo gone and Rizzo neutralized, Serafina had effectively dismantled the immediate threat to her leadership. However, the underlying tensions within the famiglia remained, the old guard still clinging to their power, the rival families still circling, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Serafina knew that she needed to consolidate her position, to solidify her control, to create a lasting peace. She decided to focus on rebuilding the famiglia's legitimate businesses, diversifying their investments, creating opportunities for the younger generation, those who were disillusioned with the old ways, those who yearned for a different future. She invested in education, in healthcare, in community projects, demonstrating her commitment to building a better society, a society free from the grip of organized crime. But her efforts were met with resistance, both overt and covert. The old guard, seeing their power and influence waning, sabotaged her initiatives, spread rumors, attempted to undermine her authority. The rival families, sensing an opportunity to exploit the divisions within the famiglia, launched a series of attacks on her businesses, disrupting her supply lines, threatening her allies. Serafina, however, refused to be intimidated. She responded with swift and decisive action, using her intelligence network, her loyal capo regimes, and the support of Marco Bellini to counter the attacks, to protect her interests, to maintain her control. She also discovered a secret, a deeply buried truth about Antonio's past, a secret that could shatter the famiglia's foundations, a secret that could expose the hypocrisy and corruption that had festered for generations. Antonio, it turned out, had been involved in a series of illicit deals with corrupt politicians, with law enforcement officials, with powerful figures in the business world. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies, of deceit, of betrayal. Serafina was faced with a dilemma. Should she expose the truth, risking the collapse of the famiglia, risking the exposure of her own past, her own complicity in Antonio's crimes? Or should she keep the secret buried, maintaining the facade of legitimacy, protecting the famiglia from the consequences of its past? She confided in Luca, sharing her burden, seeking his counsel. Luca, as always, offered her his unwavering support, his honest advice. "The truth is a dangerous weapon, Serafina," he said. "It can destroy, but it can also liberate. It can cleanse, but it can also wound. You must decide what is best for the famiglia, for yourself, for the future you are trying to build." Serafina wrestled with her conscience, torn between her desire for justice, for transparency, and her fear of the consequences, of the chaos that could ensue. She knew that exposing the truth could destroy everything she had worked for, could shatter the fragile peace she had brokered. But she also knew that she could not build a new future on a foundation of lies. She could not create a lasting peace without confronting the past, without acknowledging the sins of her predecessors, without atoning for the damage they had caused. She made a decision, a bold, risky decision that would change the course of the famiglia's history. She decided to expose the truth, to reveal Antonio's secrets, to confront the past, no matter the cost. She would build a new kingdom, not one of ill-gotten wealth. A kingdom built on secrets, yes, but secrets that she would control, that she would reveal, at the time, and in the manner, of her choosing. The choice was made, and an empire trembled. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Serafina's decision to expose Antonio's secret sent shockwaves through the famiglia and beyond. She called a meeting of all the capo regimes, the heads of the rival families, and key figures from the political and business world. It was a gathering unlike any other, a moment of reckoning for the entire organization, for the entire city of Palermo. She presented the evidence she had gathered, the documents, the recordings, the testimonies that revealed Antonio's web of corruption, his illicit dealings, his betrayal of the Famiglia's code of honor. She spoke with a quiet authority, her voice resonating with truth and conviction, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those assembled, assessing their reactions, gauging their loyalty. The reaction was mixed. Some were shocked, dismayed, their belief in Antonio, in the Famiglia, shattered. Others were defiant, angry, their power and privilege threatened. Still others were calculating, opportunistic, seeing a chance to exploit the chaos, to seize control, to reshape the Famiglia in their own image. Isabella Bellini, her face a mask of cold fury, accused Serafina of treachery, of betraying Antonio's memory, of destabilizing the entire Mafia world. She threatened war, promising to unleash her forces against Serafina, to destroy everything she had built. Sal DeMarco, who had resurfaced from the shadows, saw an opportunity to regain his lost power. He rallied the disgruntled members of the old guard, those who had resented Serafina's reforms, those who yearned for the old ways. He launched a series of attacks on her businesses, her allies, attempting to undermine her authority, to create chaos, to seize control. Serafina, however, was prepared. She had anticipated the backlash, the resistance, the attempts to overthrow her. She had strengthened her alliances, fortified her defenses, prepared for the final confrontation. With Luca by her side and Marco Bellini leading the charge, and supported by the younger capo regimes who believed in her vision, she fought back. They countered DeMarco's attacks, protected their territories, defended their allies. They exposed Isabella Bellini's hypocrisy, her own involvement in Antonio's corrupt dealings, weakening her support, isolating her from the other families. The final confrontation took place at the Mancini villa, the same place where Serafina had first claimed her throne, the same place where she had faced so many challenges, so many betrayals. It was a battle for the soul of the Famiglia, a battle between the past and the future, a battle between darkness and light. The fighting was fierce, brutal, a clash of loyalties, of ambitions, of ideologies. Serafina, armed with her courage, her determination, and her love for Luca, fought with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cubs. Luca, his loyalty unwavering, his skills honed by years of experience, fought beside her, protecting her, guiding her, supporting her. In the end, Serafina prevailed. DeMarco was defeated, his ambition crushed, his followers scattered. Isabella Bellini, her power diminished, her reputation tarnished, was forced to retreat, to accept Serafina's authority, to acknowledge the new order. The battle was over. The war was won. But the victory was bittersweet, bought at a heavy price. Many lives had been lost, many wounds had been inflicted, many scars remained. The Famiglia was forever changed, its foundations shaken, its future uncertain. Serafina, standing amidst the wreckage, her heart heavy with grief, but also filled with a sense of hope, of a new beginning, knew that the true work was just beginning. She had to rebuild the Famiglia, to heal the wounds, to create a new legacy, a legacy of justice, of respect, of love. The hearts had been broken, tested, laid bare. The loyalties were forged, some destroyed, some renewed. The final confrontation had happened, and a new queen, finally, had taken her throne. The question was, could she keep it? Epilogue. The years that followed the final confrontation were a time of rebuilding, of healing, of transformation. Serafina, with Luca by her side, worked tirelessly to reshape the Famiglia, to create a new organization, one based on principles of justice, respect, and community. She divested the Famiglia from its illicit activities, focusing instead on legitimate businesses, on creating opportunities for the younger generation, on investing in education, healthcare, and social programs. She established a foundation to support the victims of mafia violence, to offer them a chance at a new life, to heal the wounds of the past. She fostered relationships with other families, building alliances based on mutual respect and cooperation, creating a more stable, more peaceful environment in Palermo. She worked with law enforcement, with politicians, with community leaders to eradicate corruption, to promote transparency, to build a better future for the city she loved. The Famiglia, under Serafina's leadership, became a force for good, a catalyst for change, a symbol of hope in a world that had long been dominated by darkness. The old ways were gone, replaced by a new vision, a new ethic, a new way of being. Serafina and Luca, their love deepened by the shared challenges, the shared triumphs, the shared commitment to a better future, finally found peace, a quiet happiness that had eluded them for so long. They married in a small, private ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and allies, their vows a testament to their enduring love, their unwavering loyalty. They adopted a child, a young girl orphaned by the violence of the past, offering her a loving home, a secure future, a chance to experience the joy and innocence that had been denied to so many. They built a family, a new kind of family, one based not on blood or tradition, but on love, on choice, on a shared commitment to creating a better world. Serafina, the widow who had inherited a throne of darkness, had transformed herself into a queen of light, a leader who had brought hope and healing to a world that had long been shrouded in shadows. She had faced her demons, confronted her past, and she had emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken, her heart filled with love, her legacy secure. She often walked in the gardens of the villa, the same gardens where she had once sought refuge from the pain and loneliness of her past. The scent of jasmine and night-blooming cereus still filled the air, a reminder of the life she had left behind, but also a symbol of the new life she had created, a life of beauty, of peace, of enduring love. The sun set over Palermo, casting a golden glow on the city, on the mountains, on the sea. Serafina, her hand in Luca's, her child playing nearby, looked out at the horizon, her heart filled with gratitude, with hope, with a profound sense of peace. She had found her throne, not in a palace of power, but in a kingdom of the heart, a kingdom built on love, on loyalty, on a shared commitment to a brighter future. The echoes of the past still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by the promise of